What's up everyone, Tanner here, and based on the title, you know that I'm back with another aquarium build. What we have here is a standard 2.5 gallon Aquarium aquarium that I modified myself. At a first glance, I'm sure that you could tell that the modifications that I made were of course removing the trim. Buying those nice rimless aquariums are really expensive, but in this instance, I paid 10 bucks and I got a nice rimless aquarium. I will say though that removing the trim on newly manufactured aquariums is quite difficult. I've dismantled my fair share of aquariums over the course of time, and older ones are always easier to dismantle, but in this case and other newer aquariums I've taken apart, you really gotta just hack away at it with various tools until you can get it all removed. Anyways, after a lot of tedious, careful work, you're gonna end up with a pile of scraps and a tank that needs cleaned up. That's of course when the razor scraper comes in play and you can remove all of the old silicone. Once I get an aquarium to this point, I always like to wash it off with some water to remove any debris, and then I dry it clean. I'm going to be honest in saying that once I got the trim removed from this aquarium, I didn't trust filling it up with water without having some sort of bracing system. The reason I say that is because upon further inspection, I feel like this is a somewhat shoddy construction job. Some of the pieces of glass don't really line up as well as I would like, and the silicone job overall just seems kind of sloppy. That aside, I added a pane of glass to the left and right sides of the aquarium using some GE Silicone 1. As I've expressed time and time again, this is a great DIY alternative to what's typically sold as aquarium grade silicone. Once I applied the silicone and put the pieces of glass in place, I allowed everything to cure for 24 hours like I typically do, and I removed the excess silicone. And that is how we ended up with this beautiful 2.5 gallon Nano Aquarium. Now that we have a tank to work with, let's go ahead and scape it. To do so, I'm going to be using a large portion of stones as well as other materials that I'll show you in just a moment, but whenever you're using a lot of stones, especially in a rimless tank like this, it's a good idea to add something along the bottom to better distribute the weight of the stones, and to do that, I'm using some egg crate light diffuser. This is just a small piece that was cut out of a large 4-foot by 2-foot section using some wire cutters. I really like egg crate because it has a lot of uses for various projects that I work on, and it's quite inexpensive. However, a lot of people don't know where I buy it, and I've said it before, but I typically buy it at home improvement stores near the lighting section. It usually runs around $10 to $12 for a 4-foot by 2-foot sheet. Again, the reason that I'm putting this egg crate in the aquarium is to better distribute the weight of heavy elements such as stones. While we're talking about stones, let me show you what I have for Hardscape. I wanted to do something a little different for this one, so I went in my front yard and I got a bunch of this pink quartz which we use to landscape with. Before using these, I scrubbed them off really well under hot water, and I also separated them by size so that way when I go to scape, I can ensure that I have enough sizes to make a cool scape. When hardscaping your tank, it really helps to have a lot of variation in size of the elements used, so that way you can create a lot of texture and thus create a natural look. I should also mention that to get these smaller sizes, I just took a splitting maul to a few larger stones and created what you see here. I think I want to primarily scape it with stones, but I also have some manzanita wood here as a backup in case I change my mind as I'm working through the scape. We've addressed pretty much everything that we need to get started with this except for the substrate. What I have here is some Seachem Fluorite Dark. Now you may be saying, Tanner, that doesn't match with anything that you're using in the scape. That really doesn't matter because it's going to be completely covered up once we start to plant it, but let's go ahead and put this in the aquarium. That should be enough to start out with. I'm just going to use a paintbrush here to even it out. I could always remove some if it's too much or add more if it's not enough. You'll notice that as I typically do, I have the substrate shallower in the front and then it gradually slopes up to the back. This helps create a little bit more depth, but as we scape it, I'm going to kind of work that around the hardscape and it will look a little bit more natural than just a slope going up towards the back of the tank. So we've got all of the substrate in, but before we can go any further, I want to put a black piece of paper on here as a background. I'm just using some Scotch tape here to tape it onto the background. I always intend to do this at the very beginning of the build, but I usually forget and end up doing it at the end. Luckily I remembered this time, and we're going to add it on there. Now we've got a background in place, let's go ahead and start scaping it with the pink quartz. I'm going to start out with this big one here. I don't know if that's quite where I want it. I think I'm going to take this out and actually start with the driftwood. I definitely like what's going on here, but I really want to incorporate some of these stones. So I'm going to take this out. Put this stone here. Kind of want them almost to be, yeah, like laying. The hardest part about scaping for these videos is always trying to scape without seeing what I'm actually doing. Of course I can see it from the top, but it's not quite the same perspective that you see right now, so I always have to keep going from here to the front of the camera to see exactly what I'm doing. So I'm pleased with the preliminary scape here. I think that's relatively strong. We of course have to add a lot of the detail elements, but the main base of everything is there and I like how it looks. If I were to fill this up in its current state, all of the manzanita wood would float and ruin the scape. So what we're going to do is glue it onto the stones with some gel super glue. What I have here is some Gorilla Glue gel super glue. I get a lot of questions about this, but if you're using just plain old cyanoacrylate super glue, whether it be gel or the regular super glue, it's totally safe to use in your enclosures as long as it's totally cured. And in this instance, when I went to go take off the lid here, it kind of popped off so it doesn't have the nice dispenser on it. But regardless, we're going to use this to glue the wood onto the stones. So whenever you're going about super gluing things in your tank, you do not need a lot of glue to do this. So if you saw that stick was laying right here, I'll just put a single dab there, and that should be enough to hold it in place. Add some glue right there. I believe that's where it was lining up. Everything is glued together now. I'm going to let this sit overnight, and then we'll proceed to set it up completely in the next day. It's the next day. Everything's been sitting for a good 20 hours or so. All of the logs are firmly glued into place, which means we can go and finalize the scape. Before I finalize the hardscape, I want to add some more substrate into the background so I can build up the land a little bit better. I actually don't think that the color of this substrate is as far off as I thought from these rocks. Once they get wet, they're kind of dark, but we'll see what happens. There's enough substrate built up now that we can finally start adding all of the small accent elements. As is, it looks alright, but these elements are really what are going to make this setup look special. And here it is, the finalized hardscape. I really like how it turned out. I think there's a great amount of variation in texture, and I think it's going to look even better once we get it planted. That leads us to the plants, which for this one is going to be all terrestrial mosses. I've been getting requests for this setup for quite a while now, and I knew it was finally time to make it happen. First things first, if you want to see where I got all of these mosses, I'll link up the video from last week, and I'll also link a video down in the video description that shows you how I propagate them here. You may be thinking to yourself, how is a terrestrial moss going to grow completely submerged underwater in an aquarium? Well, moss is an extremely resilient plant that can adapt to a variety of different conditions. In nature, it's often growing near sources of water, acting like a transitional element going from the land into the water, so it's not uncommon to see it growing underwater in nature. That said, there are a few mosses that won't adapt to those type of conditions, and I'm not sure if all of the ones I'm going to use here will work long term, but I know for a fact that at least half of them will because I've used them with great success in the past. Enough talk, let's plant. I'm starting out up front here with a little bit of liverwort. Like I've said in previous videos, liverwort isn't a moss, but it grows in similar conditions, so it will do quite well submerged underwater. I also want to add some liverwort over in this section. I'm going to add some thread moss right here. I want to make sure that I go under this stick so that when it grows up, it kind of grows around it and creates some cool texture. Now I'm going to add a little bit of star moss. Now I want to move up into the rock work a little bit and get some haircap moss in here. Now I'm going to add a little bit of badge moss over in here. Like I did on the other side where the moss was under the stick, I really kind of want to utilize that so when the moss grows tall, it will kind of encase the stick and it will make a cool little natural scene. I'm going to add some more liverwort over in this section. If you notice, I'm primarily using that as the foreground plant just because it's probably going to be less inclined to grow as tall as the mosses will. Now I'm going to fill in pretty much the remainder of this section here with fern moss. This one's going to grow slightly taller than everything else around here, so it'll be good as a background plant. I also want to add a little pop of color right here with some hypnomoss. Lastly, I'm going to add some sphagnum moss in the back here. Since it grows way taller than anything else, it's going to look great as a background plant. We're all planted and ready to go, and I think it looks so cool. There's just one more thing that we got to do, and that is add a few accent stones throughout the setup. At this point, the tank is pretty much done. I'm not going to fill it up till tomorrow because I don't have the time, so I sprayed down the tank real good to keep up the humidity and covered it up with some saran wrap. To my right, we have the finalized terrestrial moss Nano Aquarium. Before bringing it over here, I cut out a piece of rubber to put on the bottom to better distribute the weight. I also filled it up with some dechlorinated water, of course, and you may also be wondering about lighting. On top, I just have a small Exoterra hood with a 5000 Kelvin, 9.5 watt equivalent LED bulb. I've used this lighting apparatus for years to grow moss with great success, so I took it out of storage and am using it again on this one. I really like how this aquarium turned out. I think the scape and mosses complement each other really well. There's a lot of texture and it's just really interesting to look at. I'm curious to know what you think though, so let me know what you think down in the comments. Like I said earlier in the video, I have a high expectation that pretty much all of these mosses are going to work in here long term. The only one that I'm iffy about is the hypnomoss. Just like the aquarium plants that we typically use, these mosses have both an emerged and submerged growth form. So moving forward, we can expect the mosses to look much different than they do right now. To conclude, this is a somewhat experimental build and I am curious to see how it goes long term, but I do have the expectation that most, if not all of the mosses are going to work in here long term, and we're going to have a pretty cool aquascape. A lot of you had been asking me to do this build for quite some time, but I held off because I wanted to wait until we really got heavy into the riparium and paludarium builds. The reason that I say that is that these types of setups are really blurring the line between what's considered aquarium and terrarium, and understanding the plants and the way that they can grow both above water and underwater a lot of the times are going to help you have success with these type of setups. We could go on and on about that for hours though, so I'm going to end it here. As always, thank you so much for watching and I really hope you enjoyed this one. I know I enjoyed doing it. Before you go, if you liked the video and haven't done so already and wouldn't mind taking a moment to give it a thumbs up, I'd greatly appreciate it. Also leave me your comments and feedback because I do read all of the comments and get back to as many as I can. I thank you guys so much for watching and I'll see you in the next one, Serpa Squad. Peace.